Hello and welcome to another episode of MENable Matters with me, Steve Whitten. Now, I have a fantastic guest with me on this episode, and we are going to talk about a very tricky subject, and that is the subject of separation and divorce. So, my guest on this episode is a transformational coach that actually helps people navigate that really kind of emotionally turmoil type of area. So, I'm talking, of course, about Jonathan Burston. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I'm no doubt you're going to add significant value to our podcast today to anyone who's going through a separation or divorce or thinking about it. Because you and I have spoken a few times, and I've always come away impressed and empowered. I think with what you've had to say and help me with. So, give us a little bit of background of who you are and where you're from, and what got you into this.
Yeah, so I spent most of my career in business, managing large teams, running businesses. And about 8 years or so ago, I went through my own divorce and realized that apart from it costing me nearly an arm and a leg in the early days, um, that there was nothing out there to help individuals positively navigate divorce. You hear so many different war stories of it's the worst thing that's ever happened to people. And in many cases, that is the case. But there was nobody out there to help guide me through it. Apart from actually using your solicitor, who, whilst good at what they do and what they specialize in, couldn't do the bits that sat around it. And that is, how was I know I was going to make the right decisions for me? How could I make sure I had the right mindset to go into it? How could I negotiate the right outcome for me that was beyond what the legal advice could be presented to me as? So um, I developed my own system effectively to help self-coach myself through
Mm,
it,
mm.
to try and be something different and not have the same story that many other people have had in their divorce. And that worked reasonably well for me. I learned along the way a few pitfalls, but it helped guide me through it and helped navigate me to where I am today in helping other people who want to navigate divorce differently for themselves, because that's all they can do ultimately is control what they do, not what the other party does, but actually use it as a catalyst for positive change in their lives so that they are ready to lead a positive life after divorce. And actually the bit in the middle, they can get clarity, confidence, control over it so that they can get to to the final stage and then start to look at life through a positive lens, as opposed to what often happens with divorce of I'm divorced, what now? And so I came about of helping a few friends because I've been through it and they'd known that I'd done something slightly different to to other people to understand what should they do differently. And then that came through a series of referrals, and that established my own business, coaching business, focusing on helping people navigate divorce. So I now do that with clients both in the UK and internationally. And it is very much about helping people use it as a catalyst for positive change in their lives, but ensuring that they've got clarity, confidence, control over the process, and so that they can come out the other side.
Mm,
So
mm.
that's how I sort of, I wouldn't say fell into it, but it wasn't. It's sort of okay. It was something that I never thought I'd see myself doing. I haven't coached and mentored people in industry for many years. But then it became clear that actually there wasn't anything out there to help people navigate divorce. And what you actually saw is a lot of people used to turn to therapy and counseling. And actually, in some cases, that's absolutely very valuable to turn to. But actually, people want something that's solution focused. How do I, where I am now, and find the solutions that propel me to move forward, as opposed to constantly looking at the past, which often comes with its own pain and trauma and anxiety. But actually, let me try and put the past behind me and then move forward to something that's much more solution focused. That was the sort of the angle that I came from.
Yeah, yeah. So why is it, do you think, that for, many people, and as you've said, there's lots of war stories, to call them that, why is this such a tumultuous subject for people? I mean, I know there's the emotional side, but the reason I ask that is because a couple of weeks ago, I looked on the government website and the process of divorce looks like about four very straightforward steps. that actually doesn't have to cost a load of money, and yet you hear people saying, "Oh, I got taken to the cleaners and all that." So, what's going on there, Jonathan? Why is it such a, you know, tied up in all of that?
Uh, Steve, you're spot on. Divorce, in essence, is a very simple process.
Mm,
I often describe it as a business negotiation with a lot of emotional noise sat around it. And it is the emotions that drive the increase in costs, the time it takes, the anxiety, the antagonism that gets drawn out between both parties. And I think from that perspective, therefore, it becomes a costly exercise for
mm,
people.
mm,
And there are some very good solicitors out there who will help clients minimize the costs that they have to invest in it. But there are also others that can create more antagonism than it's worth.
mm,
So by nature, the more people you put into the process, the more risk there is associated with it becoming a costly and an emotionally charged affair. And as a result, what is quite a simple process becomes elongated, complex, costly, and driven by people's egos ultimately, because the ego is, if one party is being hurt by another, there is often a case of I want to get my own back on you type
yeah,
approach,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that is, and they drag that all the way through the process, sometimes ending up in the court process, um, because they want to make you pay for the hurt that they've been put under. Now, by nature, they're creating themselves often more hurt by doing it and elongating that, as opposed to seeing it as okay, I need to start to think about moving forward with my own life. And the quicker I can put this past behind me, recognizing that it comes with its own issues and, anger and frustration, the sooner you can start to move forward. But
Mm,
often people have a challenge of wanting to stay in the old world because this new world where they're headed is so uncertain. It's got a fog around it. So actually, what you used to know is the bit you're holding on to for dear life, and as a result creating more pain, which by nature then creates more cost.
mm, mm.
And therefore you get the only people that win out of it are solicitors and the courts, because that's where you end up hemorrhaging money towards. So I think that's, you're absolutely right. It's a short process and it's an easy process, hampered by individuals and hampered by their emotions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I think you're absolutely spot on with the emotion side of it, and when you start bringing all of that into anything, really, that's where things sort of start to spiral out of control. And of course, there's a mental health impact there, isn't there? And I'll think back to your system. To tell us a little bit about that, because that captured my imagination when I saw some of that. You got a really nice document I think you sent out that I saw that
Yeah.
got some steps in there that were good.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are four pillars I describe to navigating your divorce. One is clarity, one is confidence, one is control, and one is commitment.
Hmm.
And each of those has its own part to play in ensuring that you come out the other side with something that is allows you to move on with your life. So
Mm.
often the divorce process, you only learn about the divorce process when you go into it. So
Hmm.
we're hugely reliant on other people, either people who've also already been through it and they'll tell you their war stories, the opinions of others, or on your solicitor to provide you with the right advice. And so we just often headlong into it. It's as though we're trying to get to an end goal or a path on a journey, but we've got no map to get us there, apart from a few people prodding us and poking us to go down, take these turns.
And
That
everyone's got an opinion, haven't they?
everybody's got an opinion. It's like having children. Everybody's got to have an opinion when you have a child. Everybody's got an opinion when you're in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
divorce.
So
And
what I call wilfs, they're well-intentioned, learned friends, aren't they?
absolutely. And the question I always say to clients at that point is, who are they well intentioned towards? Is it you, or is it actually themselves projecting onto you what they think they would do in a similar
Or what
situation?
they should have done if it was in their situation
Uh,
20 years
uh,
before.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. And so by nature, when we go straight into this divorce process, what we don't initially look at is getting our mindset in the right place and
Mm,
clarity on where what we want from the divorce and what we want for life beyond divorce. So by nature, if you're not clear on it and you haven't got your mindset in the right place, then you then end up spending a lot more money with solicitors, because solicitors will say to you, well, what do you want? And you go, well, I don't know. And they'll say, well, what do you want? And you still say, I don't know. And if you don't get clarity on that, how do you know what you're going to ask for out of the back end of the divorce? And the other side of that is on the mindset perspective. If you have no clear sense of what you want from life beyond your divorce, how do you know what you want to be able to ask for?
Mm,
And how do you ensure that you get the right outcome for you as an individual? Otherwise, you run the risk that you're either outsourcing your divorce to the solicitor to run it for you. Many people do, because that's perceived to be the easy option. Or alternatively, you let the other party to drive the divorce for you, which case you're out of control anyway, and you can have all sorts of frustrations. You can moan like, till the cows come home that the other party's doing this, that, and the other. But a lot of it comes down to what we're able to control, and ensuring that we're best placed to say, this is the clarity on where I'm headed. This is what I want from the divorce. I'm in the right place in the mind to navigate this. And then, so you've got the clarity and the confidence. How do I then control the process? And how do I navigate and negotiate the right financial outcome for me as an individual? And committing to doing it, because often the other part of this is you can lose weeks and months in debate or letters going back and forth between solicitors. And often in that scenario, you are left with, again, increasing cost, time elapsed from it, and the world moves on, and you've not really moved on in your divorce. Whereas actually, if you start to put deadlines in place of, we're going to move through here to move to there to move to there, you can get through the process reasonably easily and reasonably quickly.
mm,
Okay,
mm.
people argue it's not easy, Jonathan, because my ex-partner wants to do this, that, and the other. But that doesn't mean you just relinquish control completely. You can, by nature, start to put deadlines in place of the things that you will do and want to do, and in control, and in your control, to ensure that you move the process on and get the outcome that you want.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you. So those it's just I noted them down actually, but the 4 steps are clarity, control, confidence, and commitment. I think that's really powerful stuff. And one of the things that sort of captured my imagination when we first spoke was that you talk about the bucket of overwhelm as well. And I think that I've
Yes.
carried that forward into thinking about sort of mental health generally. So tell us a bit more about that.
This came from my own personal reflections, my own personal experience, and when I was deciding on the divorce process and how to
Mm,
navigate it, uh, there were just so many things you had to think about,
mm,
whether it was finances, house, your ex-partner, your children, work, and by nature, they fill up a bucket, but your bucket is only of a certain size. And the more and more you put stuff into it, and the more you overthink and ruminate about things, and the past stories you tell yourself, and suddenly your bucket's into overwhelm. And I remember sitting 2 days at a car park not far away from where I live now, looking across a view, and I just couldn't see the wood from the trees at all. I felt a heavy cloud on me. I just didn't know what to do. And that, as a result, came about the bucket of overwhelm. I felt overwhelmed and I
yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
what to do. And I was probably one of the lowest and darkest places I've ever been in my life. And for 2 days, I was thinking, what do I do? Where do I go next? And you realize that you have to have separate buckets.
Mm, mm,
Instead of having one big bucket, you have to try and have separate buckets that you compartmentalize things into,
mm.
so that you can manage the process. The process I come back to when you reflect back is a simple process to go through. You just have to make certain decisions along the way that are right for you, and with the right advice and coaching, etc., you can help navigate that process. So you're absolutely right. Bucket of overwhelm was one of the probably the worst experiences of my life. And when I talk to clients now, it's that sense of I just don't know where to go. Where do I start? And you're having to try and help clients unpack that bucket to say, right, which are the key parts for you that you need to focus on first, which are going to give you the most amplification as a result of focusing on those, that actually the others then are impacted positively as well.
Mm.
And often you need a third party perspective to help you do that. And again, coming back to solicitors, that's not their role. And often they're not experienced in doing that, and they don't want to play that role either. That's not a criticism of them. That's not their expertise. And often counseling will, by nature, help you focus more on the past, as opposed to actually what do I need to do to move forward. So the bucket of overwhelm has stuck with me quite a lot over the years, and harpers back to the days when it was, probably one of the darkest days of my life, going through that divorce process.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it totally spoke to me as well, and resonated with me. And you and I have spoken a couple of times on situation for me, which I won't go into now. But the reality of it is that that bucket of overwhelm, I think that has connotations in the aspects of mental health everywhere. And I think that's, when we feel like that. I mean, fortunately, it sounds like it didn't get to that point for you, but you can imagine that some other people, those dark thoughts could have taken them down some fairly sinister dark thoughts as well.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely. And by nature, often from a gender perspective, men in particular are not good at asking for help.
correct.
And I know only too well from my own experience of, I didn't know which friends to turn to,
Mm, mm,
who I could trust, because by nature, a marriage invariably ends up, your friends become joint friends,
hmm
and often other partners become best friends. And by nature, there's a real power there, and women in particular often have a much stronger support network. And men, whilst being friendly and go to the pub and have a chat about this, that, and the other, often are not as deep in those relationships as women are.
mm,
And by nature, then, sometimes, and certainly in my own case, I didn't know where to turn to say, I've got a problem. And my father was particularly helpful towards me. He'd been through his own divorce previously, and he guided me with some of the things that went for him. But he was, he was in his late 80s at the time, and you don't want to put too much pressure on him in his latter days. And so you're still left with, who do I turn to? And I didn't want to turn to a therapist or a counselor. That's not what I wanted. I didn't want to focus on the past. I wanted to be able to move forward.
mm,
And again, we talk so much about mental health these days, where we talk about, turn to somebody, ask for the help, or if you notice that person isn't quite acting the way you want them to, you think they're normally acting, ask them how they are. I think we've still got a long way to go in that, but from a male perspective, of actually opening up and asking for the help, I still think there's a long way to go in that. And still think there's a long way for us to go as men to be able to ask other men, are you okay?
yeah, yeah,
And because we feel that's, there's almost a little bit of there's some sort of invisible barrier to stop us going through that. And I think, from that perspective, there is work to be done to try and help push that push that forward. And men by nature are often find it hard to when they ask for help. It's almost a sign of weakness,
mm,
and
mm,
that's back to that sort of ego of, if I ask for help, it shows a sign of weakness, and I as the man are the hunter gatherer, and therefore I'm the one that should be out and should be able to manage things. But we're human beings at the end of the day, with our own weaknesses, our own mental strengths and mental weaknesses, and we need support, and we need to be able to open up and ask for that help. And a lot of the clients I work with are men who are in that position of saying, I need external help,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there's more and more recognition of that now.
yeah. No, I totally get that, and I think that's it's a really good point about that's the whole point of the movement of MENable, is getting men, particularly in the automotive industry, which is a fast paced, male dominated, testosterone driven environment, that on the one hand there might be a little bit of bravado about talking about this, but actually deep inside, I know that the issues we've talked about will genuinely be hurting. um, can I just ask as well, I'm intrigued then to think about what you're saying there about the friends that are joint friends, and through this, the lady quite often has a support network, but the man doesn't. What do you think's going on there, that one stops the man in the divorce from reaching out to his friends, but also stops the male in the other couple reaching back the other way and saying, "Are you okay?" What's the kind of divisive thing that's going on there that stops that happening, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I describe it as a relationship fence. When two parties divorce, by nature, people slot onto either side of the fence. They're either
Right.
on your side or they're on your ex-partner's side. And
Mm,
sometimes there'll be people who say, we're sat in the middle of the fence. Um, and I think by nature of that is the story that a party will tell, their friends.
Hmm.
And often, again, coming back to the point we made earlier, women by nature have a much easier and supported network of friends, and therefore are much more willing to open up.
Mm.
And sometimes the narrative that they will tell their friends isn't always necessarily the narrative of the divorce, because by nature as individuals we want to be seen as often the victim in these scenarios, and that can work even if a woman's doing the divorce to the man or the man's doing it to the woman.
Mm. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Play the same role. And I think by that nature then, the story then that is picked up by the friends, who then go home to the husbands to say, well, you better not do that.
Mm.
Otherwise, I think they get all
Cut
sorts
your
of threats.
thingies off, whatever.
Exactly. And by nature then they're almost on slightly on the back foot. And men sometimes are weaker in that scenario of
Mm.
ability to
Mm.
stand up to the wives, just go, I'll go along with the flow because it's easier.
Mm.
And by nature then they don't reach out. And of course, I remember from my own experience of the reason I was divorcing was all sorts of reasons that were all, in what would be described in this day and age as fake news.
Mhm.
But they weren't, that none of them were right. But people believed that story.
Mm.
And the things that I supposedly had done, which surprised me that I'd done them because I hadn't, people believed.
Mm.
And they believed what they wanted to believe. And by nature then, I lost quite a lot of friends from that my first marriage. And many of them, those people, were friends that I'd had before I'd even met my first wife.
Right.
And I then thought, actually, if you can't be bothered to reach out in my hour of need, and I'm not sure I can trust you because of the relationship your wife has with my ex-wife, um, I don't think that's a friendship I'm just going to have to understand that I'm going to have to lose. And I lost a lot of friendships in there. Um, there were a small group that stayed with me and came down on my side of the fence, and there were a couple that said we're here for both of you. Well, that was turned out to be nonsense, as I realised that they were playing me against my ex-wife, and going back and telling stories to her. So you quickly realize that there was a small group that I could rely on, but I didn't, again, reach out to them as much as I should have done in the early days. But
Yeah.
that came
Yeah.
down to perhaps my own weaknesses of who could I trust. And it's part of the work I do with clients now, is to say, work out who's in your core inner circle. And if somebody's in the outer circle and they're trying to befriend you and you're not quite sure, maybe now's not the time to spend huge amounts of time investing in that relationship. Wait until the divorce is over and then revisit it,
Mm. Mm.
because you've only got so much energy you can use during this divorce process, and you need to focus it on the things that are right for you and the people that are right for you, rather than every Tom, Dick, and Harry who just effectively, a lot of us, people want to gossip and get the inside track, so then they can tell the tales and off you go again. So it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's and I think from a male perspective, it comes back to we're just uncomfortable reaching out sometimes for that
Mm.
help,
Mm.
and we're unsure of who we can ask for help. Whereas I think women are much better at doing that and have a much stronger support network, and generally will have deeper conversations that men will have. And therefore they're often in a better position to navigate it than men are.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really glad that we talked about that, because I think that's, again, the whole ethos of MENable is about getting men talking about their mental health. And I think, you know, there's, divorce is one of the key things that's going to create the most stress and impact on mental health as anything really. So, and hearing stories like you've just described of people who've had all these kinds of issues, I think that's really, really valuable advice. So thank you.
You're
Thank you for
welcome.
that. I think the men reaching out bit is the key bit, and you probably certainly do learn who your friends are in a scenario like that, I think. Um,
Yeah, and they're often smaller volume of phones than you realise actually at the time. Or certainly I did. I can't speak for everybody else, mind you. But you're absolutely right. You do learn who your close friends are at that moment in what is a major life event, and sometimes actually talking to people who you don't know is often easier, because they can't judge you. and they don't have
Yes,
an
that's
opinion
true.
about you.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Well, I remember somebody once said to me that, in any situation like that, and you've talked about the stories and the fake news and all of that, and they actually said that there's three sides to every story. There's your side, there's their side, and then there's the truth.
Absolutely.
And
Somewhere between the two of you is the truth.
yeah. So, and that's the bit that, I think you rightly said at the beginning, when emotions get in the way, and then, the whole thing can spiral out of control and cost very, very quickly. So,
Absolutely. And then you lose sight of what you're trying to achieve. And what you're ultimately trying to achieve is to, in most cases should be fair and equitable
yeah,
separation
yeah,
of assets, and ensure that any children involved are well looked after, and then ready to move on with one's life. If one
yeah,
party is trying to take the other one to the cleaners, often that doesn't happen. Or it's alternatively somebody is so outside the realms of acceptability that and fair and equitable that you know their own perception of what that they think is right for them is just so far removed,
mhm,
compared to what is expected in this country. Then they will feel that way, but the reality is that their own reality and their perception was wrong to start with and misguided.
yeah, yeah. That's very true. That's very true. So, from a MENable point of view, I mean, we're absolutely delighted that you're sort of in there on that the panel that we talk about of people that we can refer to. So, if anyone reached out to us, they can come through to you. But outside of that, I mean, how could people get hold of you or find out a bit more about what you do, Jonathan?
Yeah, so they can go to fearlessdivorce.com, where they can read a bit more about me
Love
and
that. Love that website address. That's great.
and, the opportunity to download the guide that you highlighted a bit earlier, or alternatively drop me an email at jonathan@fearlessdivorce.com,
Hmm.
JONATHAN at
Hmm.
fearlessdivorce.com, and I'll happily um, have a chat with anybody who is seeking some help to navigate their divorce. And often I will suggest setting up an initial discovery call, which is a free call to see where somebody is in the process, what help that they need, and to understand that actually there is there an opportunity for me to help guide them through it, and if not, where best placed they might be to help themselves.
Yeah, absolutely makes a load of sense. Thank you for that. So that's been amazing. Thank you. I mean, we've got some good stuff here about the four steps you talk about of clarity, control, confidence, and commitment. And you've explained the bucket of overwhelm thing, which I think again that has connotations around the whole mental health piece. Really, not just divorce, which is one clear contributory factor. But just to finish up on, then, any final hints or tips?
My advice would be use the time in the divorce to start to create the life you want to lead after divorce. Don't wait for divorce to finish to then decide what you want. Start to craft that now so that when you get to that point, you're already on the path to living the life that you want to lead post divorce.
Wow, that's great, powerful advice. Jonathan Burston, thank you so much for being on MENable Matters. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed talking to you.
I have.
And
Thank you.
we will catch up again soon, I'm sure.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you very much. Take care.